So perfect. Perfect. Kaylin, you can see my slides too?
Yes, we can.
Great. Okay, perfect. So yeah, happy Friday, everybody. Let's talk about some broadband and where we're going. So it's pretty exciting times for in the broadband space. There's a lot of activity happening, and there's going to be significantly more. So it's great to have many great partners. Well, on the call here, including Idaho Commission for Libraries, who's been they've been doing fantastic work, and it's just going to be it's going to be incredible to see the differences that are made across Idaho over the next 4 years. So anyway, so I'll just kind of go through my slides, talk about broadband, and then as Caitlin said, if you have questions, feel free to ask in the chat. We can this can be, doesn't have to be me lecturing about broadband. I much prefer conversations. So but yeah, anyway, so broadband is kind of a complicated thing. So I always like to kind of talk about, what we mean by broadband, and again, it's the way that you're thinking about data. That's ultimately the way data is transferred from one point to another. So you got to think about a series of roads and the way that information travels along these roads across the globe to the end user, and how they access that is really, really important. And you have lots of different ways that's done. It's done through globally, across transatlantic cables. It's done through middle mile, which is basically how these main highways are strung across the country, and then last mile, which is then how it gets to a user, like in a household. So it's important to kind of always kind of remember those three components, and especially as it relates to our work, how middle mile, so how those highways are built, and who has access to be on those highways, and how much, how many cars essentially can drive on those highways, and then how it gets, how it's delivered ultimately to those end users makes a big difference. Just kind of give you a sense of what it looks like when you talk about global connection. You have, of course, as I said, you have transatlantic cables and trans-Pacific cables that kind of help string countries together. And then you have middle mile access, which kind of knits the rest of the countries together, such as like this is Zayo's network map. So this gives you kind of just a sense of what highways, when you talk about broadband highways, what they can look like, right? So you have kind of entry points and where people kind of connect to and hop off of from. And then how it gets to the end user, of course, is why a lot of people have issues, right? Like how it's being delivered to, and what that technology is. It ultimately has, can kind of impact cost. It can impact, access. There's a whole lot of variables kind of mixed in this. So you have things like, we have older, like throughout Idaho, for example, you have lots of older technologies, such as states littered with DSL. So DSL is copper wire. It's basically how the phone system was connected decades ago, or upgraded through the internet. This technology it's kind of degrading, so it needs to be upgraded. So where you have pockets where you have old DSL customers and they have access to speeds of maybe 10 megabits down, 1 megabit up, that can kind of present a challenge, because it'd be kind of expensive, and you can't really upgrade that technology. You really have to overlay that with fiber. So that becomes kind of a challenge because it's expensive, right? I mean, you think about just in the scenario of like, even for metropolitan areas, say wants their DSL. Well, you think about logistically how that works. It's complicated because you have to, one, make sure where your trunk lines are located, where your middle mile access points are. And then again, how you're going to get it to an end user is you're going to go under roads, go under sidewalks, and then go through people's yards to connect to the house. And that whole process is super expensive. And why the whole process of broadband is expensive to do. You just saw TDS just announced a couple months ago that they were going to build out into Nampa, and they're going to spend $70 million just for a portion of Nampa. That's a considerable amount of money. I mean, because last year we spent we spent $38 million to connect 30,000 households across the state of Idaho, and here you have a company that's going to spend just 70 million just on one location. It kind of gives you a scale of how big sometimes these costs can get when you're trying to build fiber out to people. course, then you have cable. So a lot of people across this state use cable internet. So that's through the coax cable in your house. So if you use Sparklight service, that's cable internet. There's also mobile broadband. You're seeing that increasing more and more across the state. That, and you're going to see more of this too, as like T-Mobile, as Verizon, as AT&T kind of build out their networks and allow you to kind of use the internet from home. So they kind of like bundle their TV packages, or they bundle the internet packages together. So you have a cell phone, then you have a home, like a home modem through Verizon that's all packaged together. And then you just use one data plan and it's all connected. You also have fixed wireless, which is a pretty common technology. We've seen a lot of growth in that area. That's used radio waves to kind of connect individuals across the state. So it's all dependent upon different wavelengths and what kind of bands that they have access to in terms of spectrum. Some of the challenges with fixed wireless in many rural parts of the state, and just not in North, but in South Idaho, is one, distance. So how close can you build a tower and connect that tower with fiber? Are there trees? Are there mountains? Are there rivers, valleys, other impediments in the way, buildings? They're going to block the signal from reaching a household. How far away, how spread out is are all the homes from the tower? Because basically, once you there's a radius that's drawn around the tower, and the farther out you go, the weaker the signal gets. So, how close can you build these towers is really important for fixed wireless. But it is a very cost-effective way of delivering broadband to rural areas. Of course, you also have satellite. So typically, satellite service has been pretty average for a lot of users. I certainly get complaints all the time from legislators who are on satellite service. And one of the biggest challenges has been with that is just latency issues. So the amount of time it takes data to get up to the satellite and back down causes problems for like Zoom meetings and things like that. So you're seeing this change a little bit with Starlink, for example. You're going to see others technologies come on being launched too with Amazon and Verizon. But that low orbit satellite is really making a difference in a lot of different parts of the state, and at least giving people an option. And of course, the best thing, and the most expensive, but the best technology that you're seeing deployed primarily around is fiber. Fiber connects all of these different technologies together. So without fiber, you can't have the rest of them. You have to have the fiber, which is basically the freeway. But of course, if you can build that out to the home, it gives a future-proof technology to that home that then that they'll have good internet for a very, very long time. This is kind of just an example of what things look like. So again, you're talking about fixed wireless, the tower. We've seen, so these are actual projects we've worked on. So this is in North Idaho. And then, of course, on the right, you have a fiber project in Driggs, right? So this is kind of, again, going back to some of the expensive costs include going underground and trying to kind of connect all the conduit together with the fiber inside. So it makes for fun challenges in people's lawns. But anyways, they'll be happy with better broadband, so it works out. So, again, we're talking about, it's, to me, broadband is, the nice thing recently is that there seems to be a lot of awareness and concern about broadband, much more than there was even 5 years ago. The pandemic certainly has accelerated everything and made everyone kind of acutely aware of the gaps and their lack of access to broadband, primarily because people are home. People are home during the day. They're having to do Zoom calls, all these sorts of things when you're kind of using the internet different than you were before to like stream Netflix. All of a sudden people are like, hey, my speeds aren't really adequate anymore. And this is going to be this problem will only exacerbate itself as more people are required to be online longer and do more things online. And so the amount of bandwidth that we'll need is only going to increase. So these networks have to kind of continually improve and upgrade. When we're talking about how to solve the divide, it's not just, it's kind of a holistic approach. You gotta tackle. It's not just, hey, we need to put fiber in the ground to this house and that solves everything. Is there fiber or existing infrastructure in the ground? Can the residents who are in this community actually afford internet? Do they have devices to access it? And then a third one or a fourth one is, do they actually know how to use it? That's a whole nother part of the equation as well. So you have digital literacy, because again, if you think about one of the fun challenges, for example, of like Starlink service. If I was to tell, like I have family members who, if I was to tell, hey, by the way, Elon Musk, not personally, but anyways, he's going to ship you a box with a satellite that you're going to set up in your yard and connect to a modem in your house, and then you'll have internet. If I told one of my family members that that was going to be the situation, they would look at me like I'm well, like most of those words sound Greek to them, right? So like to expect everyone in the country to be able to do that is a challenge. And I'll show you some slides here in a bit, just kind of talking about that. But again, then can they afford it? We have situations in the, certainly areas around the state that we've looked at where people don't really have access because, average wages in that area don't really allow to have an extra expense. This is why, certainly, as we worked with we worked with the Idaho Commission for Libraries on the library project in Payette. This is a great example. You had a ton of students there that needed to use the library because they couldn't afford any other option. So you have to have facilities like libraries and other public Wi-Fi hotspots. So in case people don't have access, or you have to have more competition to kind of lower those prices, so that people can have access. I mean, if people are having to pay $300 a month for satellite service, it's not really a cost-effective sort of broadband internet for a lot of people. So anyways, all these things are kind of mixed into the equation. And so if you just kind of try to tackle it from infrastructure alone, it won't fix the problem. So that's why it's good to kind of have lots of partners and think about this in a sort of nuanced, complex way. So when we're talking about why speeds, like why there's such an issue with broadband and why people are like really are talking about it a lot more, I just kind of like to bring up this slide from Deloitte. The column there, if you look, so it's video conferencing group call. So if you look at that and look at 720 HD at that column there, what you'll see is the upload requirements for a video conference group call, even at HD levels, is 2.6 megabits. So the FCC for a long time has defined broadband, served broadband, as 25 megabits down, 3 megabits up. That's what they defined as broadband. This is changing quickly as we're seeing a lot of pressure, and we have 3 federal agencies now declaring broadband, served broadband is 100 megabits down, 20 megabits up. But this right here, this line basically highlights why there's a problem, because all of a sudden, if you have someone working from home and they have a 25.3 connection and they're on a video conferencing group call, which a lot of them are, all of a sudden you're going to run up against your bandwidth capacity very quickly. And if you're running a VPN that usually uses another meg, you're going to have, all of a sudden you're going to have issues. And especially because even though you have a 25.3 connection, that doesn't mean that you're always getting 25.3. I mean, anyway, if you run speed tests at your home, go home and run a speed test like throughout the day if you're home during the day, and you'll see speeds kind of fluctuate at times. It's unless your provider is providing you a dedicated line 24/7, then you're going to see your speeds go up and down. And those sorts of factors kind of have influenced why people kind of are feeling the pinch and why they feel that they have a broadband gap. All this is kind of together. And then when you look at this list, streaming and gaming, especially as you're looking at like the types of things that may be needed for augmented reality, or doing virtual reality things, all that's going to require a lot more bandwidth and capacity. So you're going to need much more speed, just so that students, especially in rural areas, can take advantage of these, technologies. I always think about, I don't know how many on this call watched a lot of The Simpsons, but I always remember one of my favorite clips, being the historian, it was like when Lisa was studying history, and they put on the VR headset, and she imagined she was with Genghis Khan as they were roaming around the hills. Like that's the sort of stuff you can envision like in the future, right? But that doesn't really happen if these students don't have access to higher speeds of broadband. So we talk about why there's a huge, again, like what this gap kind of looks like across Idaho. So you have basically, these are kind of what I kind of picture as to be the two sides, the guardrails of the highway, right? So we're kind of somewhere in between this. So the FCC estimates probably 83,000 people, but Microsoft speed data that they basically take when people are doing Microsoft updates, they indicate this is down around 670,000. So it's probably somewhere in between. But even if it's even if it's 400,000 people, that's quite a number that we need to connect, and it's quite an expensive proposition that we have to tackle. So again, like when we're talking about home connections by income, you're talking like, look at this is a great, I have a lot, I love taking the Pew Research charts. So here again, you're talking about like what this impact is for poor people, low income families. Again, low income families, like the number of them who have home internet connections have grown over the past decade, which is great, but it's still much lower than high income households, which makes sense, and it should be no surprise. But again, that's a huge barrier that you need to overcome. When we talk about kind of like what those gaps look like in terms of just coverage and speeds, this is what it looks like in the Boise area. So no surprises to really anyone that you should see coverage is pretty strong in the downtown areas. When you look at Boise, what should stand out to you is that the areas in Meridian, which are newer subdivisions and have been built recently when they've been putting fiber on the ground, indicate higher speeds, which again should make, I mean, that's what that tells you right there. And of course, older areas on the bench where it's more cost prohibitive to do these major overlays and this major investment are seeing slower speeds. And then of course you get out to the rural areas, you get outside Payette and even into, more Boise National Forest areas, and the internet connection there the picture's pretty bleak. So that's where the kind of like the challenges are. And then you talk about cost. Oops, there we go. So you talk about cost and what affordability looks like between communities. This is a map between Salt Lake City and Boise, just showing average cost of broadband between the two metropolitan areas. So the dark green areas average $100 to $150 a month, and the normal green areas are between 50 to 100, and then the light green that you see in Salt Lake only are between $25 and $50 a month. So you can see kind of like how like Salt Lake has done significant amounts of investment across their area in Middle Mile and bringing more competition, how that's actually kind of lowered costs, average monthly costs for users in Salt Lake compared to Idaho. But again, the thing that I always like to point out is when you look towards the rural areas, that's where it's super expensive, right? I mean, so you're looking at average monthly costs of $100 to $150 a month. It's expensive. It's expensive for families, right? So that's an added burden to give to them. And then when you look at just kind of the things that I think are really we're trying to tackle too in this state, and we've put a lot of money to, is kind of having devices for for students. But you look at kind of where like how the data maps out, for the percentage. So this is the percentage population 25 and older, so high school graduates, and have some college that don't have access to a computer. So it flows with which again shouldn't be a surprise, but it flows with like areas of poverty, in the valley. And so that's again, if people don't have a computer, how are they supposed to use the internet, right? And then how are you supposed to use more like, well, hold on, I'll show you let's go to this. So again, you're talking about mothers and families with low incomes. So here's some of I just pulled this today. So you have mothers and parents with lower incomes are more likely to have trouble with helping their children have, with tech for online learning. Again, so this is like, none of this is really hard, like it's just good to kind of see. But for me, it's just like, yeah, no, duh. But it kind of reinforces like, well, if a child doesn't know how to use the computer and a parent doesn't know how to use the computer, how are they supposed to learn, right? What are the tools and the resources that are out there to help them with this process? So you have 36% of lower income families have like expressed a lot of difficulty helping their K through 12 students with online learning, right? I mean, that's crazy. And then of course you look on the chart on the right, and we certainly saw this with examples in Idaho last year with when we were going through the CARES Act grants. So 37% of lower income families had to do their schoolwork on a cell phone. We saw this. We had a family in Kootenai County where like the two kids were doing homework on cell phones. How is that and you think about like how that's a barrier to those children's education, and how farther back that puts them compared to their peers, and how that limits them going forward. It's substantial. How many were not able to complete their schoolwork because they don't have access to a computer at home? You see 25% of lower income families. How many, like 23% had to use public Wi-Fi to finish their schoolwork because they did not have reliable internet connection at home. I mean, it's crazy how many stories I've heard from students who have this sort of experience. I mean, I've heard in rural areas where, students are hopping from house to house to complete schoolwork online, or, it's, of course, the example that we saw, like that we saw in Payette with all the students there running over to the Wi-Fi, at the library there. But of course, I just heard an example too of a family in rural Elmore County that was having to this woman had her own business, and she was having to go to the public Wi-Fi hotspot because her internet was so unreliable. I mean, she has a business, right? And she's doing work, and there's stuff in there that, again, like ensuring all these things are kind of connected and people have the opportunities to kind of grow and expand and do things like telehealth, distance learning, have those sort of economic development opportunities is really, really crucial. And it's just, anyways, it's kind of present. So it's kind of exciting to kind of, again, be working on this sort of stuff. So talking about a little bit about grants and where we've been and where we're going. So this is a map. So if anyone's ever curious, you can kind of search NTIA's indicators of broadband need. You can find this. It's a freely available map. I point people to it all the time. This kind of gives you a sense of where there's gaps. And if you look, you just do a comparison of the Northwest or the West, essentially. You look at Idaho versus, our Western neighbors, you can see where the darker shades of red mean bad. So that means that we have a lot of work to do, essentially what that means. I think for like the STEM Action Center, one of the things I would point out that's kind of interesting is the ACS tab on here, where you can do 25% or more households report no computer, smartphone, or tablet. That may be an interesting checkbox to use, and you can kind of look at that. So as I said, last year we did $38 million in CARES Act grants. So we impacted 30,000 households. We divided that into household grants, public safety, which is kind of local governments, and then we did telehealth grant in North Idaho as well, in Benoit County and St. Mary's. So that was really good. It was great to see the impacts we're seeing already from some of the data that some of the speed test data that we're seeing. We're seeing improvements, which is pretty fantastic. So that's really encouraging. And of course that, we're going to have a lot more funding to do even more. This year, let's see here. Oops, there we go. So in 2021, the Idaho legislature formed the Idaho Broadband Advisory Board. So they also awarded $10 million in CARES Act grants left over for broadband projects. So that went to improving broadband connectivity to 3,800 households in Idaho. And actually, I think there'll be more. We had a couple that built a little bit more from that. So spending $10 million, so that's really encouraging. Those projects are finishing up now. We're getting grant applications. Our requests for payments coming in right now, so we're super excited about that. So we'll get those processed in the next 30 days. The board is also in the process of creating a statewide broadband plan, which will kind of outline kind of the board's priorities and where they want to put spending. And they also have $35 million in state funding that they can then put towards projects that they want. So that's kind of exciting stuff too. Then the bigger pools of money that we're looking at come from the Capital Projects Fund and the Infrastructure Bill. So the first one, which is there's $118 million there, and then more with the Infrastructure Bill. The other thing that to kind of think about it is we've had ARPA dollars that have gone to state and local governments. So there's a whole lot of money that went to counties and cities for broadband infrastructure. So what I've heard is that the counties and cities are kind of waiting. They've been waiting for guidance from Treasury and just trying to kind of figure out what their projects want to be. I found out earlier this week. Sorry, time is flying. I found out earlier this week that one of our cities actually is going to allocate some ARPA money for a broadband project, which is the first one that I've heard of. And I think and I don't think there's many ahead of them. So there's a couple that are in the works, which is very exciting. But I think it doesn't hurt from the STEM Action Center's side of things. And I tell this to my friends in the Idaho Commission for Libraries too, be reaching out to communities and talk with communities and figure out what their plans are with their ARPA dollars. What does it look like? What are they, do they have broadband, or are they going to spend on water and sewer infrastructure, which is greatly needed too. So the important things to kind of remember, and this is kind of the exciting part, I think, for what the infrastructure picture looks like going forward, because this is going to be mirrored in subsequent federal grants. Broadband projects must deliver speeds of 100 megabits symmetrical, or if that's not feasible, it needs to be 100 megabits down, 20 megabits up, with the capability of going to 100 megabits symmetrical. Essentially, what that means for new projects is it means fiber needs to be laid, and most projects will be fiber, or if that's not possible, it's going to be fixed wireless, but the towers have to be connected to fiber in order to deliver 120 that's scalable. So essentially what that means is projects are going to be, at least for the state of Idaho, are going to be more expensive than across the country. And then you're just going to see faster speeds for everybody, better technology. And part of this is essentially what's going on from the federal side of things is essentially a lot of this is going to be seen as once in a lifetime sort of investment. And the technology that's going to be put in the ground is going to be once in a lifetime sort of investment. So it's meant to be scalable and long lasting. And so that, because we don't know when it's going to be upgraded again. So when we look at the capital projects fund, that should be 118. We'll receive 118 million for broadband grant infrastructure. Those areas are areas in the state that don't currently have access to wireline delivery of 120. That's essentially most places outside the metro areas in the state of Idaho, essentially. Because it means that areas that don't it rules out fixed wireless delivery. So essentially it means if you have cable or fiber. And so we've done several fiber projects in the past couple of years, and other communities are building out fiber infrastructure, which is great. But outside of that, and most of those areas are fair game for investment. And we'll still look at unserved. I think we'll look, unserved is now being classified as 25.3. So that's up from the FCC's classification of 10 megabits down, 1 megabit up. And underserved will be 120. And there'll still be a priority on looking at unserved areas. And of course, going to the last mile will be really, really important. The other cool thing I think for communities too to kind of think about, again, this will be similar in the infrastructure bill, but service providers must provide an affordable broadband monthly plan, and they must participate in the, it's now no longer called the FCC's emergency broadband benefit. It's called the affordable broadband. Anyways, sorry, I'm forgetting the acronym, but anyways, there's the plan just changed with the infrastructure bill. But anyways, it's going to force ISPs to kind of have an affordable option for everybody. So I think that, again, the structure and thought process behind a lot of this is to encourage ISPs to be delivering and bridging that digital divide and bringing internet to families that can't afford it. So it's really good. So when you talk about, just to kind of give you a sense of this is the FCC's very conservative and overstated maps, but it gives you a good sense when I talk about like what coverage areas look like and what that means in terms of areas to kind of look at. The yellow areas are basically areas that we would look at as being eligible for broadband infrastructure. So you kind of mirror this across the state, and you just kind of go, oh, that's a lot of area. So yeah, that's what we're looking at. So hooray, lots of stuff to work on. It's really, but you can see, and this is, we talk about the way that the infrastructure is kind of built out. It kind of goes with the way that maybe your gut would feel about it, or you kind of know deep down, right? If you're in Caldwell, in the city of Caldwell, the internet's okay, but you drive out to like Sunny Slope and you're like, things maybe aren't quite as good out here. And then you drive south of Lake Lowell into Melba and things are really bad, right? It flows kind of with where you kind of know with your gut where the internet is and isn't, but it kind of gives you a visual representation to kind of support what you're feeling is true. So it's good. So again, on the infrastructure bill, so I don't receive at least 100 million. It should be more than that, what we're looking at. So there's going to be substantial investment in the state. The also interesting thing is that there'll be a 25% match requirement from communities. And communities can be from ISPs, can be from communities, can be from communities ARPA dollars. So that will be really good to kind of have that match involved, just to kind of spread the dollars and kind of just kind of leverage some of the federal funding. The infrastructure bill, like we've gotten a lot of questions about it already from individuals. It's still fairly new. The NOFO, the Notice of Funding Opportunity, won't be out till May. So NTI is currently drafting and preparing for comment, actually, from states, and we've had lots of conversations already. So they can get more conversations and more comments from the states. But yeah, so the NOFO will be out, then the state will have to apply and start submitting plans. So that sort of stuff won't be necessarily ready. I wouldn't anticipate the spending to be ready until maybe early 2023. And they're still kind of waiting on for a bulk of the money that will come to the state, waiting on the FCC to finish their map, which will be done in conjunction with NTIA, which will basically be mapping out more of where the unserved locations are across the country. So basically the FCC will come to NTIA and say, here's all the eligible locations that are you're able to fund, and that's what you can kind of work on. So those things will have to be completed before we can kind of really start working on the infrastructure bill dollars. But anyways, it's still exciting, and at least gives me some breathing room to kind of focus on capital projects fund money first. So that's great for me. Anytime to give me a little bit of runway is appreciated. So talking just some of the other things just to kind of think about, I think for this the STEM Action Center is, there's going to be a lot of jobs in STEM coming up across the country. It's a great time to be in telecommunications. So for example, so you just kind of carve out the amount of money, right? So you have $48 billion going to states for broadband infrastructure, right? So that's a lot of money. Then you have states spending money themselves. We spent money last year. California is going to spend $6 billion of their own. Virginia just announced they're spending $700 million. Maryland's going to spend $300. Montana's going to spend $275 million. All these states are spending additional dollars themselves to bridge the digital divide and to kind of put broadband infrastructure in the ground. I was at a conference and I was hearing a supply chain director VP from Corning was saying that, listen, construct electrical contractors and if you have someone that's doing like a journeyman electrician, they're soon going to have to be network engineers. Like they're going to have to transition as people are working in homes, and it's not just about like connecting doing the light switches and doing the plugs. It's now going to be like, well, did you put Cat 6 through my house, and you set up so I can have all my devices connected? I mean, that's what's going to happen. So encouraging more students to be thinking about going into this field, because it's certainly you're going to see impacts from these dollars for the next decade. I think it's really, 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 really important. Of course, and you see lots of different jobs. I pulled this from MZ last night. So, I mean, there's lots of things out there that are in great demand. I can tell you all the ISPs that I work with are scrambling and need lots of people to work. I mean, and when I say lots, and when I say they're scrambling and they're freaking out about workforce, I think that's putting it lightly, because they all need people right now. And it ranges, right? It's like you have telecommunications equipment installers, you have repairs, you have people that may need to repair lines. So like if a fiber line gets split, are you out there? You're able to kind of work on fixing that. You have, people work like electronics engineers, software developers, computer network architects. Like there's a whole bunch of different cool jobs that you can be working in the telecommunications industry. And again, because there's so much work that's going to be done across the country, it's also fairly flexible, right? I mean, like if you have to move somewhere, that you're going to have a job somewhere else too. This is another MZ slide here. This is just kind of This kind of gives you this is from Charter, so this is just their kind of their trend in hiring. But again, you're seeing the pickup in computer science related jobs, project management, network technicians, network engineering. So you're seeing how those are kind of changing over the past couple of years. But again, these are the sorts of jobs that Charter, who's one of the largest cable companies in the United States, what they're kind of looking at. So again, kind of like thinking about like what communities can do as well. So we're always hoping our communities will start working on. There's a couple things like start working on their broadband action teams. So just basically getting a community together to kind of figure out what we need in the community. So what is our broadband problem now? What's the solution? Let's map out, see what our resources are, and then let's work on a solution, and then we can apply for grants. So forming a broadband action team or getting a group together of passionate citizens who want to address the problem and want to work on it, that's really the crucial part right now, especially with all the money coming down the pipeline. It's really crucial for communities that maybe want to get and maybe want to improve their broadband to kind of start thinking about this process, reaching out to me, reaching out to partners, reaching out to ISPs, just to kind of start the process to get their ducks in a row so they're ready to apply for funds. This research, like again, the important part is understanding what your community looks like, what you can address. So for example, like if your community has a ton of multifamily housing or multifamily dwellings there that aren't connected to broadband, how do you address that issue, right? That's a different situation than if you have a lot of rural farms and that's a different composition if you have rural students. So looking at those kind of different situations, what your existing needs are and what the policies are that you can kind of fix that with are really, really, really important. Partnering on existing infrastructure is really, really important too. So we have one of the crazy things is with the infrastructure bill, there's going to be tons of money in road projects, tons into water and wastewater projects, ton in electrical upgrades. There's going to be cybersecurity, electric vehicle charging. All this stuff is going to incorporate broadband to some degree. So leveraging all these sorts of projects is really, really crucial, and working with partners is essential too. For example, I mean, if ITD is going to be ripping up a major road, if they're in an area or your local highway district is doing some major road construction, are they putting fiber in the ground? And when there's none there. So those are very simple things that you can kind of do from a community standpoint. It's just kind of staying on top of projects, especially infrastructure projects that they can kind of leverage. Leveraging all sorts of federal funds and state funds is really, really important too for communities, just to kind of continue working on. And then, of course, what really is important, I think, for us is just kind of how to address the digital divide, right? And I think, I'm glad that, I'm glad my friends from the Idaho Commission for Libraries are on this project. But again, it's like, once you get the infrastructure in the ground, that's not enough. You have to kind of figure out why people aren't accessing it, how you're doing, how you're improving that situation, how you're giving those people access. We had one of our projects in Greenleaf, for example, we set up it's the public Wi-Fi hotspots at Greenleaf City Hall as part of one of our grants last year. And they were telling me a story about how one of the citizens came into City Hall, logged on the internet there because they didn't have internet home, and they had to apply for a job at Amazon. That's the only way they could do that. And you just think about, like, what happens if that person doesn't have that opportunity? It's just, you kind of like butterfly effect the whole thing, but having that opportunity allows them to then, and they got the job, right? So they applied, they got a job with Amazon, they're getting a lot more money. The trickle down effects of all that is super, super important. So allowing those opportunities and creating that access is really crucial. It's hard to think that, I run across this problem a lot. People are like, well, I don't think anyone wants to sit in their car and access the internet. And I'm like, yeah, you're right. People don't want to do that. Like, I don't want to sit outside in my car and hop on a public Wi-Fi and access the internet. But the problem is that what happens when that's their only option? That's the crucial part, right? Like, yes, I would love to always just sit in my comfy couch and surf the internet 24/7. That's all I want. Well, maybe not 24/7, but I mean, like, but as much as I can. But a lot of people don't have that option. So ensure, and you think about applying for jobs, applying for benefits, staying connected, talking with family. I was talking with someone yesterday, and they were saying the internet. So in their area, they just got upgraded to faster speeds, and their kids they're in the military and they were overseas. And it was the first time that they were able to talk with their children overseas in forever. And they just had their children just had a baby, so they were talking with their grandchild, and they were able to do Zoom call. Like that was the first time that's happened. I mean, they've been having Zoom calls, but they couldn't use the camera. And now they can use the camera, they can see. Like those are the sorts of things, again, that it's just kind of important to kind of think about. There's a human element to this, and it's really important to kind of address that. Anyways, so there's a couple questions, and I'm just going to point to this, and then we can start again, because I'll keep just jabbering on. But there's lots of resources on our website. Please don't, if you have questions, please don't please don't hesitate to reach out. We have stuff about what the Broadband Task Force is doing. We have lots of maps. There's stuff related to what ITD is doing. We have links to what Idaho Commission for Libraries did, the Wi-Fi locations, like the public Wi-Fi hotspots, which are on our maps too. So please don't hesitate to look to our website for help. And yeah, I'll leave it there and ask questions.
Thank you so much, Eric. Lots of great information. Our first question is, can we put these slides up on our website along with the recording? Are these publicly available? Okay, yeah. So we will put these up on our website along with the recording of today. So open to questions. Please unmute yourself or raise your hand and ask your question.
I appreciate Dylan saying these are good slides. Thank you, Dylan. That's very nice.
I guess I have a question, Eric. You say get involved locally. If you could maybe provide a little bit more direction. Are these decisions being made at the city level, the county level, the legislative level? Who can we contact, or who maybe in your office would know who we can contact within our own communities?
That is a great question. I would say it's multifaceted and depends on the capacity of the community and where there's free time. So we work with all sorts of communities, and the thing that I try to always find is which person, we have communities with cities with part-time mayors. So me going and asking the mayor, hey mayor, do you want to jump on this extra project to kind of work on this? Might be a bit much, but certainly we've seen city clerks involved. We've brought in our economic development teams to kind of help. We have rural economic development professionals across the state. There's economic development professionals in most cities. There's economic development districts who have been very supportive of the grants that we've done and have done grant administration. So there's a lot, especially from the economic development side of things, there's a lot of support out there. People can always reach out to me, and I can connect you with the people in the area that are willing to be supportive. But I think in terms of forming a broadband action team, it really just takes, you probably want to involve the city or the county and kind of get support from them to say, hey, this is what we want to do. It doesn't necessarily have to always, you have to have the mayor sitting on that meeting, when they're meeting all the time, because there's a lot of work to do. Maybe you want to canvas your community and do, and just kind of track, just do an inventory of speeds. What technology are people using? Who are they subscribing to? What speeds are they receiving? Just so you can kind of get an understanding of what it looks like in community. Does the mayor have to be involved in those? No, but you could have a community come together and then talk with the mayor or a county commissioner and kind of start the process there.
Great, thank you.
Passion is the key. Passion and some free time. Both those are pretty important components.
Yeah. Well, part of having this webinar was because when we did our needs analysis for STEM education across the state, connectivity was one of the primary needs. And so I found it very interesting how you said, the infrastructure is one component, and then there's many steps after that. And so if there aren't any questions, I'd like to open it up to the community here, because we are all working with our schools and our after-school programs, or most of us on this call are. If there are ways in which you are supporting your local community, and once the infrastructure is in place, supporting those next steps.
I would just want to add to Caitlin, I'd be remiss if Dylan pointed out correctly that libraries are also a crucial component. And my omission wasn't because I didn't think that. It's just things are flying through my brain. But libraries are great. Like the Idaho Commission for Libraries is a great partner. And again, when your community is talking about digital divide efforts, you should be including the Idaho Commission for Libraries in that, because that is the work that they do and the things that they're addressing. They're fantastic partners. So it's good to leverage them. I would also add too, I showed some of the maps that we have. So we have availability of maps. So as people are, especially as, your partners at the STEM Action Center, if they're curious about like what's broadband look like in my area, let me know. And I can walk them through, show kind of what the landscape looks like, where areas are that probably need better broadband and where they don't. And of course, we would appreciate information back. And I know that Idaho Commission for Libraries would too. Any information on where the gaps are that you guys are seeing with students where they're having issues with connectivity, that sort of information is very valuable.
And this is Stephanie. I hope it's okay just to kind of jump in and just let folks know that we're hoping to make a bigger splashier announcement in mid-January, but we are going to be starting to work with stakeholders to build a statewide coalition to really work on a digital access for all Idahoans statewide plan. And each state will be kind of required to have a plan in place, and then some dollars on the federal level will be flowing through to help address kind of more of the adoption issues. Eric and those folks are really working on the availability, but everything he talked about for adoption and those human level barriers, and that will really take a whole big team and all of the stakeholders to work together to help address. And I'm really looking forward to working with everyone in the ecosystem and stakeholders throughout the whole state, starting with that coalition building and kind of one-on-one meetings, and then gathering in groups and talking about all our communities and addressing those barriers. So it's an exciting opportunity, and really look forward to delving into that in 2022.
I am also super excited for it.
Yeah.
I cannot wait.
I was going to say that's incredibly exciting. I look forward to all of us supporting that effort in the coming year and years. Additional questions for Eric or comments about connectivity, broadband, the digital divide that we face here in Idaho? I'll just say I appreciate the comment about job opportunities in this space, and that's something that this group can also support, especially thinking about adults that want to maybe change careers and how they can shift into this space, and working in that workforce development component, so that we ensure that we're filling these jobs and supporting the great work that can come from this infusion of money, and like you said, once in a lifetime investment into our connectivity. So that's, I think, a charge maybe more towards this group as we work in the STEM education and workforce development field.
I would welcome that effort. I think others on this can probably attest to that I'm spread a little thin. But I think the workforce component is, I've heard from several ISPs, several of them are doing on-the-job training. I think it's standing up. The challenge I see is that I would love to start standing up programs at community colleges, but I think in a lot of ways it's too late for that, honestly, because it's like that's something that should have been done. You know, if you want to get really ahead of it, you would have done it 2 years ago or 3, 4, or 5 years ago. But that doesn't mean there's not a lot of opportunities to partner, right? And to kind of, you know, in some of these, let's see here. Hold on, let me go back. Oops, sorry. Anyways, I'll send you the slides. There was a slide on there though that I had where it basically listed some of the opportunities that required high school education. So there's lots of jobs that, you know, you can do on the job training, and you just need high school education. So if students are looking to get out and get a job now, while they kind of think about what they want to do, there's so many great opportunities to kind of take advantage of. Just let me know how I can help, Caitlin, if you need data or anything like that, or me to be a bullhorn. I guess I can do that too.
Yeah, I'm already crafting an email to catch up with you after this. So thank you.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Okay.
Any additional comments or questions?
I appreciate John's comment too, from rural areas to help revitalize those economies. Yes, that is the hope and dream. Honestly, for a lot of the communities, is attracting more remote workers. I heard, actually, it was crazy. I just heard the other day that there were estimates that there was 200 Apple employees floating around in Boise who are working remotely, which to me was a lot of more than I was expecting, honestly. But again, as you're, you know, and certainly we've seen this with growth in McCall and other resort communities, you know, where you've seen some growth in people moving there. And I think there are a lot of opportunities for those communities. You know, having someone move in who's making a 6-figure salary in a very remote community can have a very, very outsized and significant impact there. So being able to kind of allow that to happen is crucial. But again, you know, if they can work remotely, it's not. So timing is of the essence in a lot of this.
Well, thank you so much, Eric, for this wonderful information. This recording will be available on our website along with the slides. And as I mentioned, we'll continue this webinar series holding one a month. So if you have thoughts or ideas, don't be shy. Shoot myself or Erica an email. We'll pop those into the chat in a moment. Thank you for joining. Happy holidays, and I hope you all have a great weekend. And thanks again, Eric. This was really wonderful and informative.
Yeah, no problem. Thank you. Happy holidays, everybody. Thanks again.
Thanks.
Oh, hi, Senator Dave. How are you? Or Senator Dave,
sorry.
Senator Lent. I'm sorry.
Sorry, I'm so late getting on. I got distracted this morning. My water's out, so something's the matter with the well.